Hey, Ronnie here. In this video, we're going to cover 10 general tips in regards to CB radios. Citizens band radio. So these tips will cover both the handheld and the vehicle mounted radios. Here in Australia, we use UHF as the dominant one, which is on 477 megahertz, but we also use the old style, the CB radio on the 27 megahertz as well. So for those international viewers, these tips will work for you as well. Most of the 10 tips in this video are mainly for beginners. However, if you are an advanced user or a frequent user of the UHF radio, there'll be a thing or two here for you as well. So let's get into it. Tip number 1. Audio, let's start with the basics. A two-way radio. You push to talk and you let go to listen. We all knew that, and if you didn't, now you do. Now, a thing that we find a lot of people don't realise is when they use the handset, either one, they either talk too close and you can't really hear what they're saying because it all sounds all really muffled, or they hold the microphone too far away and you can't really hear what they're saying because it's too far away. So the optimum distance from your mouth is about 6 inches, so don't eat your microphone. With the handhelds, when you're outside the vehicle, wind can be a problem. Stand your back to the wind or shield it with your mouth, because if you don't, you get this kind of noise. And no one can really understand what you're saying. So if you work out how to talk on them properly, and you know how to change the channels, and you know how to turn your volume up and down, and you know how to turn it on and off, you basically know how to use a UHF radio or a CB radio. There's not much more to it really. So we'll get into the other tips now. Tip number 2. When you have a new radio installed, or you just bought a new radio, or before you head out on a trip, it's always good to do a radio check first to make sure everything works. So radio check is very important. Also, if you've got a big group of people, you're about to take off, everyone just needs to do a radio check, and then everyone knows you're all on the same channel and all your radios are working, and then there's no, you can't get through to Jono because his radio's not working and you got to pull over and try and let him know. So radio check. Tip number 3. So now you know how to use your radio. The next most important thing to know is the channels you can actually use in your country. On your screen right now, this is the Australian only channel chart. You can download this from our website if you are in Australia. If you are on the 27 megahertz radio and you're in Australia, the channels will be different. And if you're overseas, international countries will be different too. So you will need to find a channel chart from your country. Number 4. UHF and CB radios rely on line of sight. So take the vehicle mounted one. This one here is 5 watts. If the line of sight is there, I may not be able to see that far, but if the line of sight's there, I'll be able to transmit 20 to 25 kilometers with a 5 watt radio on these aerials. That said, if you have a lower powered handheld radio, your signal may not be able to travel that far. There's a number of reasons for it. One is you got this little aerial on here, which means that you're transmitting from here. You're not transmitting from the top of an antenna instead. So there's a height difference there. But you can improve that by doing this. So I've got a microphone plugged into it. Even if you don't have that, you can pull it out, you can yell at it, climb up a tree, stand on your roof, then you'll be able to get more range out of it if you need to do it. Trust me, in an emergency situation, that one's good to know. Now, line of sight with these smaller radios, if you have a 0.5 watt radio or a 1 watt radio, your range is actually quite restricted. So even though if you do have a line of sight for 10 to 20 kilometers, you're not going to get that out of these little radios. You're only going to get a couple of kilometers at best. And if it's a 0.5 watt, you may not even get a kilometer out of it. So keep that in mind. Other things that restrict line of sight are hills, buildings, a lot of trees, stuff like that. So keep that in mind as well. So when you're in the hilly areas, some antennas are better than others, but that'll be in another video. Tip number 5.
CB Radio scan function. It basically works by pressing the scan button. It will cycle through all the channels available on your radio. If there is any activity on any of the channels, it will stop briefly. This is where you need to take note of the channel. So why would you need it? Well, if you're coming down those narrow tracks, you want to know if anyone's coming towards you. It's a good way to find out if anyone's on there. Also, if you're stuck and you're in trouble, you can always press the scan button and see if you can find someone, rather than going through every single channel and try and call for help.
Tip number 6. Duplex mode. Right now, your radio is probably in simplex mode, which I refer to as simple mode, which is probably the only mode you're really ever going to use your radio in. Duplex mode, I honestly don't think that you will ever find the need for it. However, if you do, I suggest you read your manual, because I don't want to bang on about something you're probably not going to use, but I'll cover it briefly, very briefly. Basically, in Australia on the UHF channels, you got channels 1 to 8. They are duplex channels. Do not use those in simplex, please, because you clog it up. Now, in those channels, you pick one of those and you have a repeater tower, and you need a repeater tower. And what it does is you will send to a repeater tower, and the repeater tower repeats your signal. And the reason why to have this is so they increase your range on your signal. It can go over 100 kilometers, like more range, so someone else can pick you up. So mainly used for farmers and other things like that. So, but if you really need to know how to use it, read your manual. It explains it a lot more in detail. Tip number 7. "40 channels versus 80 channels. Now, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but I'm sure other countries do have 80 channels now as well. But here in Australia, on the UHF, we have 80 channels. The beauty of that is most people still use the first 40 channels. Why is that good? Well, the higher channels from 41 to 80, there's a lot less traffic. So if you're doing convoy trips, or just in general, you and a buddy are out there driving around, I'd suggest going into the later channels, because there's a lot less traffic on there and there's a lot less interference from other people trying to talk. We find that when we sit on a specific channel in the later 80, we rarely get anyone on there at all. Twice we've heard someone, and we've used it, 50 plus trips so far, this particular channel. The only downside is you got a buddy that joins you in your convoy, and he has a 40 channel radio, the rest of you have 80 channel radios. Too bad, so sad. You're gonna have to use the first 40 channels. Otherwise, you can't communicate with him. Tip number 8. CB slang, or CB talk, CB code talk. I'm now going to give you my considered must-know slang for when you're on the road with your buddies out in the bush. Now, most people will know half of these. The other half are more for like frequent users. So this will be a good one to show your buddies too, so you all know what you're talking about. And why do we use them? Well, it makes it clearer and a lot easier to understand, rather than someone trying to tell you something. It's all abbreviated, it's short, it's snappy. People understand what's going on, and everyone can 10-4 copy that.
Breaker breaker, or breaker 19er. You are about to start broadcasting, or you have something very important to tell someone that is worthy of cutting off their conversation. 10-4, copy that, or roger, or even roger that, or you can just say copy, which means I hear you loud and clear, and or I agree. 410, this is basically 10-4 in reverse, so you're kind of asking a question. 410, do you agree? 10-9, in other words, please repeat, I didn't quite hear that. 10-6, I'm on the phone, or I can't quite talk right now. 10-20, or what's your 20? Basically, what is your location? 10-51, I'm heading to you. I need a 10-100. I need a toilet stop. Over and out. In other words, I'm signing off, or this is the end of my transmissions.
Tip number 9. Now, this next tip here is not a requirement, but it'll emphasize why it's good to have vehicle mounted and the handheld, to have both of these. Now, because you've got the vehicle mounted, you're going to have the good range and it's always going to be there. It's not going to run out of power because it's running off your vehicle while the vehicle's running. Good reason to have a handheld as well is the following. For recoveries, because you can take the radio out and guide someone. You leave the vehicle to go and check out what's on the other side of a hill. You can then call back on your handheld and tell people what you're looking at. And another good reason is for spotting another buddy coming down a technical section or whatever. It will more than likely, well, 9 times out of 10 will require you to leave the vehicle and walk over to your friend, your mate, whatever, and guide them through the situation they're in. Tip number 10. So my final tip for you in this video is, which radio do you really need to get out there? You don't need to have a vehicle mounted radio. I can understand that some people may not be able to afford it, or maybe they're not too sure if they need it yet. There's a good reason to get a handheld. Now, handhelds come in all different sizes and prices and strengths, and you can borrow one off your buddy or your mate and just go from there, or just buy one of the cheap ones. Just bear in mind, if you get a cheap one, your range is going to be very limited. For more tips on UHF or CB radio, I'm going to do one on antenna placement, where to mount your speakers, where it's best to do them, and talk about twin radios, having 2 radios in there running on a different channel each. So that video will be here and it should be there right now. If not, come back and check later. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe here. Take it easy out in the trucks and trails. Over and out.